On Christmas Eve, my son looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, get out." No shouting, just that flat edge in his voice and the click of the deadbolt, and there I stood on the porch I'd swept for decades with one suitcase and the cold working its way through my coat. I'm 60 years old. My name is Linda Parker, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. For 35 years, I ran 5 garden centers with my late husband, Michael. We started with a tin shed and a gravel lot and a cash box that stuck when it was humid. Over time, the sheds became greenhouses. The gravel turned to brick, and that cash box turned into accounts people whispered might total $20 million at the peak. Paper numbers never tell you about sap that clings to your fingers or the solid knock a healthy root ball makes when you tap the pot, and they never tell you about the way customers' faces light up when their camellias finally bloom after a hard frost. Michael and I built that life the way you stake a young tree, steadying it through wind, checking the ties after every storm, and smiling when a tight bud promises the first blossom. 4 years ago, Michael died of lung cancer, though he never smoked a day in his life. We spent a year in waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and hope, counting pills into plastic trays, learning to read results we never wanted to see. One quiet afternoon, blinds striping the quilt with pale light, he squeezed my hand and said, "Love Jason, but don't spoil him. Teach him to stand on his own." I promised. Grief bends promises. After the funeral, the chair across from me stayed empty. The television filled the rooms with borrowed voices, and nights got long in a big house that creaked in the winter. Jason, my only child, told me he would stay so I wouldn't be alone. When his car broke down, I paid $15,000 because I told myself a good mother buys safety. When he wanted to try a business, I wrote a check for $1 million because I told myself a young man needs a chance. 8 months later, it failed and we didn't talk about it. When he married Alyssa and said they needed space, I put up $500,000 for a house in Buckhead because I told myself a grandchild deserves sunlight and a quiet nursery. Each time I said this would be the last time. Each time the last time turned into the next. Love without offense is not love. It is fear dressed up as generosity. 6 months before that Christmas, Jason told me Alyssa was pregnant. He said their place felt cramped, and, to be fair, mine was big for one person. He suggested we live together like a family. He said Alyssa could look after me and I could hold my grandson every day. That picture was bright enough to blind me. I asked if they would sell their house and move in clean. He said it would be smarter to rent it out as an investment and make room at my place. I said I needed time to think. He did not wait. 2 weeks later, they arrived with boxes and took over the second floor like a summer storm rolling in fast. New curtains went up while the old ones went to a donation pile. Fresh paint covered the colors Michael and I had chosen. The rug we bought on our 20th anniversary was too dated. When I asked to keep our bedroom as it was, Jason said it was the master suite and the baby would need that space. He told me not to be selfish, that it was only a room. I moved into the little staff bedroom at the back of the house, the one with a window over the driveway and a heater that ticked when it kicked on. I told myself a small room was a fair trade for a grandchild's laughter. When Silas arrived, I waited for that laughter to echo down the hall. Instead, rules did. Designer diapers, special formula, the most expensive everything. If I wanted time with the baby, there were expenses to cover. When I reached out to hold him, Jason told me my hands shook and it would be safer if I admired him from a few steps away. I learned how a house turns into a maze where you are always in someone's way. Don't cook. The kitchen is busy. Don't watch television. The living room is in use. Don't water the ficus. We're changing the plan. At the same time, Jason asked for access to the company accounts to modernize operations. He promised to streamline and grow profits. At first, I thought new blood might help after a hard stretch. Then the people who could read a leaf like a doctor reads a chart were let go. Cheaper suppliers sent glossy plants that wilted a week after customers took them home. Prices crept up, profits slipped away, and trust drained out like a slow leak. When I asked where the money was going, Jason said into growth, and that I didn't understand modern business. I told him I had been doing this work most of my life. He told me that was exactly the problem. 3 months before Christmas, he set a stack of papers in front of me and said we needed to organize things to protect me because I was getting older and sometimes forgot. He mentioned keys I had misplaced and a date I had mixed up, small jabs that make you doubt your footing. I picked up a pen and then heard Michael as clearly as if he stood in the doorway. I set the pen down and said a lawyer should review the documents. Jason's face changed the way it used to when a teenager hears, "No." From that day, the house cooled a few more degrees. Alyssa stopped speaking to me. I was told I would not see Silas unless I cooperated. And then Christmas Eve came. I woke early and planned a simple breakfast the way I used to. Pancakes with crisp edges, bacon in the oven, cinnamon rolls that make a home smell like comfort. The kitchen, I believed, belongs to families on holidays. Alyssa was already there, arms folded. She said they had plans that did not include me and called Jason. He came downstairs like a man checking on the help and told me her family was coming and that I would ruin the celebration. I said this was my house. He said it was our house now and they needed privacy, and if I finally signed what he wanted, maybe I could come back. I said again I would not sign anything without a lawyer. He pulled out his phone and showed me a record that said the deed had been transferred into his name 2 months earlier. I told him that was impossible. He said the papers I had signed to organize the finances did more than that the transfers were notarized, that the signatures were mine, and that the businesses were his now. He gave me 30 minutes to take what I could carry and said if I returned, they would call the police and report me for trespassing. I climbed the back stairs to the little room and packed a few clothes and 2 photographs of Michael, standing among our azaleas in spring. My wallet held about $1,000. The credit cards no longer worked. When I came down with the suitcase, Jason stood at the door with his arms crossed and told me that when I was ready to sign a paper declaring me incompetent, he would let me return as their guest in that small room. He said it as if it were mercy. I stepped out and the door shut with a sound you do not forget. The street was colder than the house. A neighbor's porch light clicked off, and somewhere down the block someone laughed. I walked because forward was the only direction I had left. A few blocks away, a little park opened up between buildings, and I sat on a bench and let the truth catch me. I had broken the promise I made to Michael. I had let fear wear the mask of generosity and move the fence posts until there was nothing left to lean on. After a while, a well-dressed young man stopped and asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. He looked at my suitcase and then at my face and told me I didn't have to pretend on Christmas Eve. He said his name was Raymond and he worked for Mrs. Vivian Sterling. If you live in Atlanta, you know that name. She is a widow whose companies stretch far beyond this city. He told me she needed a gardener, someone who could coax life from tired soil and didn't watch the clock. The job came with a small cottage on the grounds. He said Mrs. Sterling valued dignity, and he saw it in me. I told him I had owned 5 nurseries for 35 years and lost them that day to my own son. He did not flinch. He asked if I wanted a second chance. I looked up at the sky the way you do when you need a nudge from someone who is gone. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something warm move through the cold. I said yes, and he drove me out to the property so I could rest and start fresh in the morning. What I found behind those hedges changed everything, and when Mrs. Sterling saw me lift my hands to speak in her son's language, she said 5 words I will share in part 2. If stories about family, regret, and second chances matter to you, if you want to hear how a life can be replanted after a hard winter, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. I will tell it plain, the way older folks do when there is no time left for anything but the truth. Raymond drove me through a set of iron gates, past hedges trimmed sharp as a part in a man's hair, and up a long drive that curved toward a pale stone house. He carried my suitcase into a small cottage tucked behind a stand of magnolias. It had a bed that didn't sag, a chair by a window, a little kitchen with a clean kettle, and a bathroom where the light came on without a flicker. I slept like someone who had been walking against the wind for miles and finally found a door that opened. At 8 the next morning, I knocked on the back entrance of the main house. A maid showed me through rooms hung with quiet paintings and family photographs. It felt less like a museum than a place where people still set down mugs and forget them. We stepped into the rear garden and I saw a woman on her knees in the soil, bare hands working a trowel. She stood as we approached. She was a little younger than me, hair the color of chestnuts with streaks of honest gray, jeans and a white blouse with smudges on the cuffs. Her eyes were steady and kind and tired. "Mrs. Sterling," I said. She smiled. "Call me Vivian, and you must be Linda." We shook hands. Hers were warm and dusty, the way a gardener's should be. She walked me along gravel paths bordered by roses that had not been dead-headed and a boxwood hedge that needed a patient hand. She told me this garden kept her steady after her husband died. She said there was someone I needed to know before I did anything else. Her son, Marcus, was 8, born deaf, a bright boy who loved to sit under the big live oak and read about dinosaurs. No one on staff knew how to talk to him. She tried and was learning, but the words came slow through her fingers. She looked at me in a way that told me this was not just information. It was a mother asking for a door to be opened. I told her the truth. My late sister-in-law was deaf. Years ago, Michael and I learned enough American Sign Language to talk and laugh around the dinner table. It had been a while, but you don't forget the language of hands the way you don't forget the smell of rain on dry soil. Vivian's breath caught. She gripped my hands as if to steady herself. "Could you try?" she asked. "This afternoon," I said. 3 o'clock, she said, and we both nodded as if we had agreed to something larger than a time. The hours until 3 went by, the way good work does when your hands remember before your head does. I made quick notes about irrigation, about pruning, about which beds needed to be turned and left to rest. I cleaned my tools because that is how you begin again, by respecting the work. When the school car rolled up and a small boy with dark hair and a backpack hopped out, I wiped my palms on my jeans and walked toward him, slow enough not to surprise him. He looked at me with the directness children use before the world teaches them to flinch. I lifted my hands and signed, "Hello. My name is Linda. I'm the new gardener." His eyes widened, then softened. He signed back, "You talk like me." "Yes," I signed. "My family learned. What are you reading?" He held up a book with a long-necked dinosaur on the cover. "I like the ones that eat plants," he signed. I told him I liked those too, and that we could plant strawberries and peaches and maybe a row of blueberries if his mother agreed. He turned toward the house without moving his feet, as if to pull his mother into the moment. Vivian had come to the edge of the terrace without our noticing, hands clasped, tears shining the way dew does when the sun comes over the fence. She walked to us, knelt so she was eye level with her son, and signed, "Are you okay?" He signed back, "Mom, Linda talks like me." He added, "She's going to plant fruit." Vivian looked at me and spoke 5 soft words that slid straight into my bones. "Where have you been, Linda?" That afternoon became a pattern. I worked mornings with the beds that were failing and the ones that were only sleeping. Marcus came home at 3. We signed about dinosaurs and photosynthesis and how trees move water from root to leaf. He showed me how fast he could fingerspell when he was excited, and I slowed him down when his hands outran his thoughts. Vivian watched from the terrace the first few days, then inched closer. She learned with us, fingers stumbling and then finding their rhythm. At dinner, one evening, she asked me to sit with her on the back steps while Marcus built dinosaur bones from little white sticks. "You have given him more than a language," she said. "You gave him a bridge." I told her the bridge goes both ways. In the coming weeks, the garden began to answer back. The boxwood hedge softened under careful pruning. The roses, relieved of their tired blooms, put out new buds with the kind of red that promises a deep pink. We layered compost through the beds like a blanket. At the corner near the kitchen, I claimed a square for Marcus. He chose strawberries, then asked if we could add mint because he liked the smell. We tucked in a dwarf peach and a line of blueberries along the fence, where they would catch the sun. He signed to me that plants were like people. Each one needed something a little different to do its best. Vivian and I fell into a comfortable rhythm of work and talk. She asked about Michael and about the stores, and I told her what I could without dragging sorrow into every sentence. She told me about running her late husband's companies when people expected her to sell and fade away. We did not talk about money. We talked about showing up when you are tired and starting again when it would be easier to stop. I slept each night in the cottage like someone who had finally sat down after standing too long. I did not hear from Jason. Maybe that was a kindness. Maybe it was another kind of silence. I kept my phone off during the day because a garden needs your whole attention. Some nights I stared at the little screen and wondered if my number was still saved on his phone as Mom, or if it had become a line he no longer recognized. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after I started, Marcus came running up the path from school with a paper to show me. He had drawn our strawberry bed with little red hearts where the berries would be. He laughed without sound, head thrown back, and it was the sweetest music I had heard all winter. Vivian invited me to dinner in the formal dining room not long after that. It was just the three of us. After he went up to finish homework, Vivian poured coffee and we sat on the terrace, while the last light turned the lawn the color of old brass. She said, "I don't want to pry, but will you try to get your businesses back?" And then, one bright morning, with the roses just opening and the mint making the air clean, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and saw a new car pull up to the circle. I will keep telling it plain the way older folks do, with the hope that somewhere it helps you tend your own life a little better. Jason stepped out of a shiny new car and walked up the gravel like he'd been here 100 times. He spread his arms as if we were meeting at a picnic and not at the edge of a life I had only just begun to steady. "Mom, there you are," he said, and his smile was the old one he used in high school when he wanted to borrow the keys. I felt the ground firm under my boots the way it does before a summer storm. He wasn't looking at me so much as past me, measuring the terrace, the long windows, the quiet sweep of a house that did not belong to him. I told him to say what he came to say. He started with apologies, words about stress and new babies and bad decisions. He said we were family and that family forgives. I told him family does not need pens and notaries to take what it wants. The smile slipped. Then he asked who owned the place. Was she reasonable? Would I introduce them because maybe there was business to be done? I said that was not his concern and asked him to leave. Vivian had been watching from the doorway with Marcus tucked against her side. She stepped onto the terrace with that steady calm that makes people stand up a little straighter. "You must be Jason," she said. He switched to charm like a man who keeps different hats in the car. "Yes, ma'am. Linda's son. I've been worried about her." Vivian's eyes did not soften. She said she had heard enough to know what mattered, that this was private property, and that it was time for him to go. He tried another road, talking quickly about my age and health, about how someone needed to look out for me, about how I could come home if I would only be reasonable. Marcus signed near my elbow. "Is this your boy who forgets to be kind?" I nodded. Jason caught the movement and frowned. "What was that?" he said. I told him it was not for him. He took a step toward the terrace and security appeared at the curve of the drive, quiet and present. He backed up with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, and he spun the wheel hard enough to spit gravel. The noise started 2 weeks later. A gossip site ran a grainy photo of me and Vivian in the garden, arms around each other, taken with a long lens from outside the fence. The headline called me a gold digger. Another site claimed I had abandoned my son who had sacrificed years to care for me. Then a letter arrived from a lawyer who said Jason planned to sue for compensation for his familial services. Words like those look tidy in print and are rotten underneath. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter and a cup of coffee gone cold, and felt fear try to climb back up the stairs. Vivian read the letter once and set it down. She said we could crush it in court if I wanted. I told her that was exactly what Jason wanted, attention and a fight he could spin into fresh sympathy. She looked through the window at the beds we had nursed back to life and said we would not let him turn our days into a circus. The garden steadied me the way it always had. Marcus and I tucked straw around the first strawberry plants in his little square. He signed that the internet is a loud place where people say things they would never whisper in a garden. We both smiled at that. At night on the terrace, when the house had gone quiet and the mint near the kitchen door sweetened the air, Vivian poured tea and asked if we could do one simple, firm thing that would shut the gate to rumor. She said she wanted to marry, not someday, not after the headlines cooled, but now, and she wanted a prenuptial agreement so clear that no one could mistake why we were standing beside each other. She wanted words that said, in plain English, I had no claim on her fortune or her company's, that if we ever parted, I would leave with what I brought, my hands, my name, and the truth. I told her I did not need contracts to prove my heart. She said the paper was not for us. It was for the crowd at the fence, and for Marcus, so he would grow up having seen a love that did not have a price tag. We talked until the garden lights clicked off. I asked if she was sure. She said, life is short, and what is true does not get truer by waiting. I said yes. The lawyers drafted the agreement in a day. I read every line twice. It said what we already knew. Vivian signed without blinking. I signed without looking up to see who was watching. We married in the back garden under the live oak where Marcus likes to read. It was a small circle. Raymond stood near the gate in a new suit. The staff gathered along the path, and the roses, cut back for winter, traced dark lines against the pale wall. Marcus carried the rings, solemn and proud, and signed to Vivian that she looked like the morning. We spoke our vows out loud and with our hands so he could feel them as well as hear them. I promised to show up every day, to tell the truth even when it was heavy, to keep learning his son's language with patience. Vivian promised to guard our quiet, to build a home where work is honored and rest is allowed, to hold the door open to joy even on the days it drags its feet. When the minister said we could seal it, the wind moved through the oak and made the leaves clap for us. We cut a small cake on the terrace. Marcus declared it tasted like clouds and negotiated a second slice with the seriousness of a judge. The headlines changed their tune in the morning once the prenup leaked. The same sites that called me a fortune hunter ran pieces about true love and humble gardeners. Their words didn't mean more in praise than they had in scorn, but the key. She wanted words that said, in plain English, I had no claim on her fortune or her company's, that if we ever parted, I would leave with what I brought, my hands, my name, and the truth. I told her I did not need contracts to prove my heart. I said yes. The lawyers drafted the agreement in a day. I read every line twice. It said what we already knew. Vivian signed without blinking. I signed without looking up to see who was watching. We married in the back garden under the live oak where Marcus likes to read. It was a small circle. She said the paper was not for us. It was for the crowd at the fence, and for Marcus, so he would grow up having seen a love that did not have a price tag. We talked until the garden lights clicked off. I asked if she was sure. She said, life is short, and what is true does not get truer by waiting. Raymond stood near the gate in a new suit. The staff gathered along the path, and the roses, cut back for winter, traced dark lines against the pale wall. Marcus carried the rings, solemn and proud, and signed to Vivian that she looked like the morning. We spoke our vows out loud and with our hands so he could feel them as well as hear them. I promised to show up every day, to tell the truth even when it was heavy, to keep learning his son's language with patience. At night on the terrace, when the house had gone quiet and the mint near the kitchen door sweetened the air, Vivian poured tea and asked if we could do one simple, firm thing that would shut the gate to rumor. She looked through the window at the beds we had nursed back to life and said we would not let him turn our days into a circus. The garden steadied me the way it always had. Marcus and I tucked straw around the first strawberry plants in his little square. He signed that the internet is a loud place where people say things they would never whisper in a garden. We both smiled at that. Vivian read the letter once and set it down. She said we could crush it in court if I wanted. I told her that was exactly what Jason wanted, attention and a fight he could spin into fresh sympathy. She said she wanted to marry, not someday, not after the headlines cooled, but now, and she wanted a prenuptial agreement so clear that no one could mistake why we were standing beside each other. "Mom, there you are," he said, and his smile was the old one he used in high school when he wanted to borrow the keys. I felt the ground firm under my boots the way it does before a summer storm. He tried another road, talking quickly about my age and health, about how someone needed to look out for me, about how I could come home if I would only be reasonable. Marcus signed near my elbow. "Is this your boy who forgets to be kind?" I nodded. Jason caught the movement and frowned. Jason stepped out of a shiny new car and walked up the gravel like he'd been here 100 times. He spread his arms as if we were meeting at a picnic and not at the edge of a life I had only just begun to steady. He wasn't looking at me so much as past me, measuring the terrace, the long windows, the quiet sweep of a house that did not belong to him. I told him to say what he came to say. He started with apologies, words about stress and new babies and bad decisions. He said we were family and that family forgives. I told him family does not need pens and notaries to take what it wants. The smile slipped. Then he asked who owned the place. Was she reasonable? Would I introduce them because maybe there was business to be done? I said that was not his concern and asked him to leave. Vivian had been watching from the doorway with Marcus tucked against her side. She stepped onto the terrace with that steady calm that makes people stand up a little straighter. "You must be Jason," she said. He switched to charm like a man who keeps different hats in the car. "Yes, ma'am. Linda's son. I've been worried about her." Vivian's eyes did not soften. She said she had heard enough to know what mattered, that this was private property, and that it was time for him to go. "What was that?" he said. I told him it was not for him. He took a step toward the terrace, and security appeared at the curve of the drive, quiet and present. He backed up with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, and he spun the wheel hard enough to spit gravel. The noise started 2 weeks later. A gossip site ran a grainy photo of me and Vivian in the garden, arms around each other, taken with a long lens from outside the fence. The headline called me a gold digger. Another site claimed I had abandoned my son who had sacrificed years to care for me. Then a letter arrived from a lawyer who said Jason planned to sue for compensation for his familial services. Words like those look tidy in print and are rotten underneath. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter and a cup of coffee gone cold, and felt fear try to climb back up the stairs. Vivian promised to guard our quiet, to build a home where work is honored and rest is allowed, to hold the door open to joy even on the days it drags its feet. When the minister said we could seal it, the wind moved through the oak and made the leaves clap for us. We cut a small cake on the terrace. Marcus declared it tasted like clouds and negotiated a second slice with the seriousness of a judge. The headlines changed their tune in the morning once the prenup leaked. The same sites that called me a fortune hunter ran pieces about true love and humble gardeners. Their words didn't mean more in praise than they had in scorn, but the key. The morning after our small wedding in the garden, the house felt steady, not grand, just sure of itself, like a porch post newly set in concrete. Marcus wore the ring pillow as a hat and signed that he had been the bravest ring bearer in the world. Vivian laughed the way she laughs now from the middle of her chest, and for a little while the noise beyond our hedges quieted. By afternoon, the headlines had changed their tune. The same sites that called me a fortune hunter now repeated the words everyone wanted to hear about the prenuptial agreement. They said I had waived any claim to Vivian's money. They said maybe this was love after all. Strangers will eat a story without tasting what it cost to cook it, so I went back to the beds we'd set for winter and let the work keep time, while the air cooled and the roses breathed out their last bit of color. Jason tried the gate 2 days later. Security met him with calm voices and firm shoulders. He shouted that he was my son, that I was making a mistake, that I needed to come home, and at the end he asked whether he could speak to Vivian because, his words, people like us understand each other. The cameras recorded it. The guards stayed professional, and when he spun the car too fast and the tires grabbed gravel, the sound stuck in my chest. There is no tidy phrase for the way a mother listens to her own child falling and knows there is no blanket big enough to catch him. That evening, Vivian brought an envelope to the terrace. We sat with tea and a blanket across our knees like old friends at a ball game. She said the documents were not a wedding gift. She said they were an investment in who she believed I was. Inside were purchase agreements for my 5 nurseries. She had bought them back quietly through a company that did not carry her name while Jason stumbled. The ink was dry. She said the businesses were ours if I wanted them, or we could sell, or we could turn them into something new with a purpose wider than profit. I laid the papers down and looked at my hands. Dirt under the nails, a thin band of gold catching porch light. I said I would not start our married life by tearing anything from my son's hands, even if he had held them loosely and spent carelessly. Vivian nodded and said that was exactly why she had bought them. We slept on it and woke with a plan that tasted like mercy, anchored to solid ground. We reopened the smallest location first, the nursery off a 2-lane road where the greenhouse glass still smelled faintly of spring even in November. We called the old foreman, the man who can tell a root-bound camellia by the sound water makes when it runs through the pot, and offered him his job back. We changed suppliers. We ordered fewer plants and better ones. We put up a quiet sign that read, "Community Garden Hours on Saturdays," and opened the gate without a ribbon cutting. Neighbors wandered in with questions and cups of coffee. Marcus stood at the register teaching the new cashier a few signs a day and insisting that everyone learn blueberry and strawberry because, he said, those were the important ones. For a few weeks, the only news that mattered was whether the mulch would arrive before rain. Then a letter showed up from a lawyer who claimed to represent Jason. He demanded back pay for years. He said he had cared for me and compensation for his stewardship of the nurseries. The phrases were neat on paper and rotten underneath. Vivian's counsel asked if I wanted to counter and make a lesson of it. I said no. I told them we would keep our promises and let the rest pass like a storm you cannot stop. The letter withered in the light once someone explained the prenup he had not considered and the purchases he had not expected. Silence followed, heavier than before. We kept working. We added a row of winter greens along the fence and taught a Saturday group how to lay cardboard and compost to smother Bermuda grass without a shovel. When the early dark set in, we strung lights in the greenhouse rafters and hosted a small staff supper, with pies from a bakery that still uses lard in the crust. Near the end, when the coffee had gone from hot to honest warm, Raymond touched my elbow and said there was a man outside asking for me. He spoke like someone carrying a delicate dish, steady, careful, no sudden moves. Jason stood under the eave by the side door. He was thinner. The beard didn't suit him, and his hands were dug deep into his pockets like a boy waiting on a principal. He said hello, not mom, just hello. He said he would leave if that was what I wanted. I told him the coffee had another pour in it and led him to the bench behind the greenhouse where the heaters hum like patient bees. He told me Alyssa had left. He said the debts had caught up. He said every smart move had turned into a hole, and the people he called friends had stopped answering. He did not ask for money. He asked for a job. Any job, he said. He needed to do something that was not lying to himself. I looked at his face where the boy I raised and the man he had been tangled with each other every few seconds. I told him what I could offer: minimum wage, early mornings, hands in soil, a cot in the employee room out back, no access to accounts, no decisions, no favors, a 6-month trial with no promises at the end. He swallowed, nodded too quickly, and thanked me for something he would have mocked a year earlier. That night, Vivian said she was proud of me, not for taking him in, but for drawing the lines. She said love without boundaries becomes cruelty, and cruelty without boundaries becomes law. Marcus asked if Jason was my boy. I said yes and no, that he was the boy I had and the man he was trying to become now. Marcus signed that people can be like plants, that sometimes you have to prune hard if you want new growth to come in. I told him he was wiser at 8 than I had been at 40. Winter taught us to show up. Jason clocked in before sunup and learned the greenhouse heater's stubborn moods. He stopped talking and started listening. The foreman showed him how to see water through a pot and know whether it reached the roots, how to spot the gray sheen on a leaf that means a greenhouse fan failed, how to save a plant in shock by shading and waiting instead of yanking and hoping. He learned to read weather by smell. He learned that you cannot rush a plant into strength by scolding it. Some days he went to bed so tired he forgot to be proud or ashamed. The foreman said he might be salvageable. That is his highest praise. I will not dress this up as a miracle. It was work and small changes, repeated. But there was an afternoon near the end of his trial when the first strawberries in Marcus's bed turned from white to a soft sunrise pink. Jason knelt and showed Marcus how to lift them with a flat palm so the stem wouldn't bruise. Vivian stood a little way off with her hands in her coat pockets the way she stands when she is trying not to cry. I took a picture that will never touch the internet. It is too dear for that. When 6 months came due, I knew what I had seen and what I had not. In part 5, I will tell you about the meeting we called in the break room, the paper Vivian slid across the table, and the terms that gave a grown man a path back to himself. If the sound of a life being rebuilt, one careful season at a time, gives you something to hold, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. I will keep telling it plain because at our age, the only thing worth spending is the truth. 6 months to the day after Jason punched his first time card, we gathered in the break room with the dented metal table and the coffee maker that grumbles like an old hound. The foreman brought his clipboard and a look that passes for optimism on him. Raymond stood in the doorway. Marcus insisted on sitting quietly on a stool because, he said, important meetings need witnesses. Vivian set a single envelope on the table and folded her hands. I started with what a mother can say without varnish. Jason had shown up before sunup in the cold, learned the stubborn moods of the greenhouse heaters, kept his head down, and opened his ears. He had not asked for keys or favors. When he made a mistake, he named it and fixed it before lunch. That counts in any honest trade. Then I said what this meeting was not. It was not a pardon stamped in gold. It was not a return to yesterday. It was a chance to keep walking forward on ground that wouldn't swallow him whole. Vivian slid the paper across the table. Apprentice Program Agreement, plain as a road sign. She read the terms out loud in the steady voice she uses when facts matter. 1 year in back of house under the foreman, propagation, irrigation, heater maintenance, inventory receiving. No access to accounts, no authority to hire or buy, weekly check-ins, with me where the only good posture is honesty. If the year stayed clean, a second year would add front of house, customer problems, vendor calls made on speaker, written proposals for improvements. 2 clean years earned management of the smallest nursery with a monitored budget. 3 clean years with strong books and good staff reviews unlocked a modest equity share, placed in a trust he couldn't borrow against or sell for 5 more years. 1 lie. 1 hand in the wrong drawer. 1 corner cut that hurt people, and the ladder came out from under him that day. I watched the muscles in his jaw work as she spoke. Pride, fear, relief, and gratitude kept taking turns across his face like wind, moving light over water. He read every line. When he looked up, his eyes were wet in a way that did not ask for pity. He said no one had ever given him a path with rails on both sides. He signed. He asked me to sign so he could see my name each time he checked himself. I signed. The foreman witnessed with a grunt that meant good enough. Then we all went back to work because plants don't clap and bills don't pay themselves. The next months tested the paper. A truck showed up with the wrong soil mix and a driver in a hurry. I saw Jason's old instinct rise. You sign the slip, push the problem forward, and pray it lands on someone else. He stopped, called me, and we stood shoulder to shoulder while he said we wouldn't put junk under a neighbor's tomatoes. The driver swore. The vendor argued. Jason read the lot tags out loud, kept his voice even, and sent the load back. When the right pallets arrived 2 days later, he stayed late to spread them and told the Saturday crew he was sorry for the extra lifting. That is how respect is earned. Slow, quiet, and noticed by the people who matter. He learned to talk to angry customers about hydrangeas that failed in July without blaming the weather, the moon, or the person holding the receipt. He started carrying a small notebook, writing questions he used to pretend he didn't have. Twice he found mistakes before they found us and brought them to me before noon. The foreman said the chip on his shoulder had healed into a scar he could live with. At home, the garden kept stitching us together. Marcus's strawberries blushed in neat rows, and he added a line of snap peas that climbed twine like they trusted it. The court allowed supervised visits, and Silas came on Saturdays, small hand tucked in Jason's. Marcus taught his cousin the signs for blueberry and patience, which look different and mean the same thing when you're 8. Vivian watched from a little distance, hands deep in her coat pockets the way she stands when she's holding back tears and letting pride do the talking. Near the end of Jason's second year, we walked the perimeter at closing. He showed me the bald spots where customers cut corners through beds and suggested a short fence and a stepping path so the fix felt like an invitation, not a scold. He outlined reviving the Saturday workshops Michael and I used to teach, then added a quiet hour for elders at the end. No charge, just questions answered, and a simple plan on paper they could take home. He said folks our age shouldn't have to stand in an aisle squinting at labels with tired eyes. That was the first time in years I heard him say our age without flinching from the mirror. On promotion day, we met again at the dented table. The foreman's report was the shortest I've heard, and from him, glowing. Raymond had baked a pie because some moments need sugar. Vivian placed a new envelope on the table. Inside was a management contract for the smallest nursery and a schedule of budget reviews tight enough to make a bookkeeper blush. Jason read, exhaled once, and signed. He thanked the crew by name. Then he turned to me and said he couldn't undo the winter he caused, but he could tend the spring he'd been given. He asked if I would walk with him at dawn the next morning, the way I used to walk with his father, palms on the heater housings, ears tuned to the quiet. We were there before first light, and the metal hummed like a promise. If this steady rebuilding gives you something to hold, subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. In the next part, I'll tell you how those Saturday workshops changed the feel of the place, how a boy who speaks with his hands taught a room to listen, and how the past tried once more to tug at our sleeves. I'll keep telling it plain because at our age, the only currency that spends clean is the truth. The first Saturday workshop felt like opening the gate on an old fairground that had been quiet too long. We pushed the benches to the side of the greenhouse and set out folding chairs. The heaters hummed. The air held that damp sweetness that makes your shoulders drop. Folks came with notebooks and coffee and travel mugs, couples in their 70s who used to shop with Michael and me when our hands were younger, widowers who were tired of staring at grass and wanted tomatoes again, a Vietnam veteran with a cane who said he missed the smell of marigolds. Jason started us off with potting soil and drainage, the ordinary things that keep beginners from quitting. He did not talk down. He talked steady. When someone challenged him, he didn't puff up. He asked a question back and let the answer lead the room. After an hour, I nodded to Marcus, who had been shifting on his stool like a colt waiting for a gate. He slid down, planted his feet, and lifted his hands. I spoke as he signed, and then I signed while he spoke with his small, clear voice, the way we practice at dinner when the table is ours. He showed them how to sign blueberry and tomato and patience. He told them patience matters most. We watched 3 gray-haired men move their hands slow, smiling like boys who finally learned a magic trick. When the time came for the elders' hour, chairs scraped forward. People held up phone pictures of dying lawns and pots with mystery sprouts. We drew simple plans on paper, the way Michael used to do, boxes and arrows and a promise that if they came back with dirt under their nails, we would keep going. That hour changed the feel of the place. It turned a store into a circle. Word spread quicker than advertising ever could. By the 3rd Saturday, a woman from a church downtown asked if we would come speak to her seniors group. Marcus insisted on going. He stood at the front in his clean sweater and taught 50 people to clap in sign. That soundless applause filled a fellowship hall and made me believe again in things you cannot list on a ledger. The past did not like our progress. It never does. One afternoon, Alyssa appeared at the nursery in a sharp coat with a lawyer in tow. She did not ask how I was. She asked where Jason was and then told the lawyer to look around and take notes. She said Silas's court visit should be moved because this was an unsafe environment for a child given Jason's history of instability. She said the boy had come home with dirt on his shoes and the smell of fertilizer on his jacket, as if we had dipped him in trouble. I wanted to remind her that boys are supposed to get dirt on their shoes. I kept my voice even. I told her our fertilizers were organic and our safety logs were available. Vivian walked out from the office like a lighthouse in fog. She greeted Alyssa's lawyer by name, because of course she knew him, and invited them to a table. She handed him copies of our safety protocols, our employee background checks, the supervised visit orders, and a calendar that showed how those visits were monitored. Then she slid over a letter from Jason's counselor, documenting his progress and compliance. She stayed on the facts the way a good driver stays in the lane on black ice. Alyssa wanted a scene. She did not get one. She raised her chin and said Silas would not be coming here again until a judge said otherwise. Vivian looked at me and said in that calm voice that makes people put their shoulders down, that we would respect the process. When they left, my hands shook a little. I'm not ashamed to say it. Jason heard later from his attorney that Alyssa had filed to suspend visits. He did not slam a door. He asked for an extra shift. Grief without motion turns into something mean. Work keeps it from hardening. We prepared for court the way we prepare a bed for spring. We laid out our tools. The foreman assembled maintenance logs and training sheets. Raymond pulled security footage that showed Silas walking the aisles between benches, like a boy in a library, hands behind his back because Marcus told him that helps you see. I wrote a short statement about what it means to tend, what it means to invite a child into honest work and call that safe. We went to the hearing in our clean clothes. The judge was a woman near my age who watched faces the way gardeners watch weather. She listened to Alyssa's attorney talk about fertilizer and risk and reputation, and then she listened to our counsel read the counselor's letter and the staff affidavits. Marcus sat beside me in his blue sweater with the elbow patches and signed to me that the judge had kind eyes. When it was Jason's turn, he did not perform. He told the judge that for 6 months he had done the kind of work that does not post well online. He told her he had learned the difference between owning and stewarding, and that he would not hide from his past by pretending it was a story about someone else. He asked for a chance to keep tending the present. The judge kept the visits in place with a note about continued counseling and a line I copied down afterward because it felt like a seed planted in the right place. She said children are safer in rooms where love and rules share the same table. After the hearing, Alyssa stood in the hall tight as a wire and said she hoped this new humility of Jason's would last longer than his last good intention. I said I hope so too. I wished her well without sugar on it. Back at the nursery, the Saturday circle grew. A retired lineman taught us to build a windbreak with scrap lattice. A widow brought cuttings of her grandmother's rose, and we rooted it in small pots and sent one home with each person who promised to tend it. Marcus and Silas planted a row of zinnias along the fence and named them after people who had helped us in the hard months. Jason started the morning round before dawn, hand on metal housings, ear to the quiet, the way he asked me to teach him. He found a fan belt that was about to fail and had it replaced before the heat of the day. The foreman grunted, which is as close to a compliment as you'll ever get from him. In the evenings, Vivian and I walked the beds and talked about renaming the nurseries to honor the people who taught us to stand where we are. We settled on Parker and Sterling Gardens, not because our names mattered more than others, but because they marked the path that made the circle possible. We sketched a modest plaque for the main gate with 2 lines. Work with your hands. Tell the truth. If you have stayed with me to this point, you know I am not selling a miracle. I am telling you a plain story about people learning how to hold the door open for each other without getting dragged back outside. In the next part, I will tell you about the day a storm took the power down across 3 counties, how we kept the greenhouses alive with flashlights and grit, and what we found at the gate when the lights finally came back on. If a steady voice and a steady plan help you the way they help me, subscribe so you do not miss it. I will keep telling it plain because at our age, the only thing worth spending is the truth. The storm rolled in like a freight train you could feel through the soles of your shoes. Phones lit up with warnings. The sky turned the color of old pewter, and the first crack of wind made the greenhouse skin ripple. By dusk, the power went out across 3 counties. The heaters died mid-hum. Every grower knows that sick, hollow quiet when fans stop and the air turns on you. We did not waste a minute feeling sorry. The foreman shouted for frost cloth. Raymond hauled propane heaters from storage and checked lines by flashlight. Jason and I made a fast triage list the way you do in a bad winter. Tender stock first, citrus and begonias, then the flats we'd promised for Sunday church sales, then everything else in order of how likely it was to forgive us. Marcus stood on a bench with his headlamp cinched tight, signing "Together" so big even the folks new to our circle could read him. He assigned jobs like a small conductor. Silas tucked hand warmers into his pockets and followed him, handing out clothespins and twine. Vivian called the seniors group the church, anyone who had ever raised a tomato with us. They showed up in parkas and boots that had seen real weather. A retired lineman checked our breaker panels. A deacon dragged in a loaner generator from the church youth building. A neighbor brought 2 cans of gas and a coil of heavy cord. He said he trusted more than some people. We didn't argue. We covered benches until our knuckles were raw and ran one small generator to the most fragile house, cycling it every hour to share heat. The foreman cracked vents by hand to keep condensation from icing. Jason carried flats like a man carrying newborns. Twice I caught him counting under his breath, calming himself by numbers. At midnight, the wind shifted and the temperature dropped 4 more degrees. We pulled tropicals tight into the center bay and made a ring of heat around them with the little propane units. Raymond walked the perimeter with a flashlight, tapping aluminum ribs and listening for the note that tells you if a connection is slipping. Marcus signed "Breathe" to the room, and for a second the whole crew exhaled at the same time, and the frost cloth rose and fell like it hurt him. Around 2 a.m, a pickup eased up to the gate and switched off its lights. I stepped out ready to say we were closed. It was the Vietnam veteran with the cane who comes to workshops. He had 3 small generators and a toolbox in the bed. "These aren't pretty," he said, "but they'll keep a fan alive." We wired them into houses 2 and 3, and the sound of those cheap engines was better than any hymn. People took turns napping on burlap sacks in the potting shed. I kept coffee going on a camp stove that has survived more storms than I care to count. If you have ever ridden out a night like that, you know how time turns into a long hallway with no doors. You just keep walking. By morning, the wind had moved on and left a bitter cold that felt honest. We checked leaves. We checked roots. We whispered thank yous to plants that had no idea how close they'd come. Jason found a fan belt split to threads and swapped it before the sun could cut the house in half with heat. The foreman nodded once. That nod means more than a ribbon. The power company trucks finally came noonish, orange flashes sliding along the road like fish in a shallow river. When the lights snapped back and the fans took that first clean breath, everyone in the greenhouse clapped the deaf way because Marcus did it first. Hands in the air, gratitude without noise. We started cleaning up, and that's when we saw what waited at the gate. Pickups, minivans, people from the neighborhood and the church and our Saturday circle, each with a flat or 2 we thought we'd lost to the cold. They had taken plants home to their kitchens and garages and kept them alive through the night by space heaters and stubbornness. Each flat had a paper tucked in a pot with a name and a note. "Kept warm for you. Back where it belongs. Charge the generator off my tractor. Don't tell my wife." The veteran climbed down slow and set something on the gravel wrapped in an old quilt. It was the original wooden sign from Michael's first shop, Parker's Garden Center. The paint scrubbed and resealed, the letters still deep from my husband's hand. He said he found it at a salvage yard 2 towns over and figured it should come home. I don't cry easy, not anymore. I put a palm on that wood and it felt like a heartbeat coming through. That evening we hung the sign in the small greenhouse where we teach the workshops, next to the modest plaque Vivian and I had ordered. "Work with your hands. Tell the truth." Jason stood under it with Silas on his hip and looked like a man measuring himself against a standard he could finally see. Vivian slid her arm through mine and said the storm had shown us our inventory of people. She was right. Stock counts can be replaced. A circle like this is the only thing you can't reorder. If the steady kind of rescue, the kind neighbors do in the dark with what they have, gives you something you can hold in your own hard season, subscribe so you won't miss the next part. I'll tell you how the county fair invited Marcus to teach a room to clap without sound, how a letter on courthouse paper tried to pull us backward, and how we answered it without losing our footing. I'll keep telling it plain, because at our age, the only thing worth spending is the truth. 2 weeks after the storm, when the heaters had forgiven us and the strawberries were setting pale hearts again, an email came from the county fair. They were reviving the old horticulture tent and wanted a Saturday demo for families. Would Marcus teach the room to clap without sound and plant a patience garden in trays the kids could take home? He read the note twice, cheeks bright, then looked at me to make sure this was real. I told him fairs are for showing what a town knows how to do. He grinned and signed that our town knew how to wait and how to listen. We showed up at the fairgrounds with a wagon full of seed trays, a bucket of potting mix, and a hand-lettered sign that said blueberries, tomatoes, and patience. The horticulture tent smelled like hay, kettle corn, and old wood baked in August sun. Folks drifted in from the poultry barn and the quilting exhibit, some out of curiosity and some because the benches were in the shade. Marcus climbed onto the little stage in his clean sweater, looked out at 100 faces, and lifted his hands. I stood beside him and echoed his signs with my voice until the room began to follow him instead of me. He showed them how to make applause with open palms flickering in the air. He told them, with his hands and his eyes and slow words, that plants grow best when we do not rush them, and people do too. He pressed one small seed into each tray, then signed that we were going to plant 3 more, one for patience, one for friendship, and one for second chances, because every garden grows better with those mixed into the soil. The tent went still as a church between hymns. A grandfather in denim overalls raised his hands and clapped without sound for the first time in his life. When the children lined up to take their trays, they tried the new hands for themselves, and I watched them look around with surprise at how good quiet can feel when it is full of attention. We loaded the wagon to leave and found a deputy waiting by the service gate, hat in his hands, eyes kind. He said there was certified mail at the nursery no one could sign during the fair hours, so he had brought it along because he recognized our name. The envelope was courthouse white. I slid a finger under the flap while the wagon creaked behind us. It was a motion from Alyssa's attorney, crisp as new bills, asking the court to revisit custody and suspend Jason's visits based on recent concerns, a phrase as wide as a river and twice as muddy. They included still images grabbed from the storm night security footage, our people hauling flats by headlamp, frost cloth snapping in the wind, framed to look like chaos instead of care. They attached a claim that the nursery environment was inherently unsafe, as if safe meant sterile and quiet meant neglect. I felt heat rise the way it does when the past tries to put a chain around your ankle. Jason read the motion once. Steady. He did not swear. He went to the tool shed and came back with the maintenance logs from that week, the generator schedule, and the text tree Raymond ran when neighbors took flats home to warm kitchens. Vivian called our counsel and asked for a hearing date and a chance to submit affidavits. The foreman, who hates paper more than frost, wrote 2 paragraphs in hand like block print. The veteran with the cane drove in and signed a statement about the generators he loaned and how the real danger that night was outside our houses, not inside them. At the hearing, the judge asked more questions than last time. She asked who checked propane lines. She asked how many adults supervised the boys when they were present. She asked Marcus what he learns at the nursery and why he wants his cousin there. Marcus signed that he learns how to listen with his eyes and that Silas learns how to be gentle with small roots. The judge nodded without smiling, which is better than smiling in a room like that. When Alyssa's lawyer waved the storm photos again, our counsel played the video in full. It showed people moving with purpose, cloth going on benches, heaters being placed upright with care, a child standing on a potting bench, signing together like a flag. The sound of those cheap generators filled the courtroom through a small speaker, and I watched the judge recognize it. That hum is the sound of neighbors refusing to quit. The order came a week later. Visits remained, with an added line that both households would complete a co-parenting class before summer. The judge's note said exposure to supervised agricultural work appears to benefit the minor child's development and should continue. Jason exhaled like a man putting down a heavy box. He thanked Alyssa for agreeing to the class when they exchanged Silas on Friday, and she said agreement was not the same as approval. He said he understood. He buckled his son in and brought him to the nursery to water the zinnias that still wore the names of people who had helped us through the storm. Work steadied us again. The Saturday circle grew. A retired science teacher started a seed library in old mason jars. A woman with careful hands taught grafting like it was needlework. Jason started the dawn rounds without asking me to join. I found him one morning, palm on a heater housing, listening the way you listen to a sleeping child. That afternoon, the county fair called to say the horticulture tent had set a record for attendance and asked if we would consider a fall class on gardens that feed the spirit. Marcus signed that he had a lesson already. Make room, make quiet, and make time. If this kind of slow rescue, law met with logs, noise met with proof, fear met with work, helps you in your hard season, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. In the next part, I will tell you about the man who limped into the nursery with an envelope that carried Michael's handwriting from a decade ago, and the decision it forced on me that no judge could make. I will keep telling it plain because at our age, the only thing worth spending is the truth. The man came in just after opening, moving slow like his right knee had been arguing with him for years. He wore a veteran's cap, not the one we knew, and carried a long envelope with the careful grip of somebody who has been trusted with one last errand. He asked for me by my full name, the one on old bank papers. When I said yes, he set the envelope on the counter and tapped it once like a door. "Found this," he said, wedged behind a steel drawer at the storage yard where your first shop kept its winter racks. Owner sold out. We were clearing the office, and this had your husband's handwriting on the back. Michael's hand, neat and square, ran across the flap. For Linda. Open when you know what the work is for. Let's use. I took it to the potting bench we use for Saturday sign-ups and broke the seal with my thumbnail. Inside was a letter dated 10 years back and a thin blue document clipped behind it. Michael had written the way he spoke when the lights were off and the house was quiet. He reminded me how we mortgaged the roof to start that first greenhouse, how he told me a business is only worth what it plants in other people. Then the turn. Years earlier, before his last surgery, he'd signed an agreement with our old landlord, a buyback option on the original acre and shop, good for $1 anytime after 10 years, if I could say hand on heart that the place would be used to teach and to hire and to grow food for neighbors who needed it. Give it, he wrote, to the one who shows up for the work and loves you right. If that's our boy, let him earn it. If it's someone else, you'll know. The blue page was the option, stamped and real. The 10-year mark fell the following week. I held the letter until the paper warmed. Vivian read it once and put her arm through mine. She said a deed is a tool like any other. She said the choice wasn't between blood and strangers. It was between the past we survived and the future we could stand to carry. Jason came in from the back with soil on his sleeves. I watched his face as he read his father's words. He didn't rush. He didn't claim. When he looked up, he said he would follow whatever decision I made and keep working either way. We called a circle that evening in the small greenhouse where the old wooden sign hangs above the benches. The foreman stood near the heater with his arms folded. Raymond leaned on a post. The veteran with the cane took the front row. Marcus and Silas sat side by side on the potting bench, feet swinging in unison. I read Michael's letter out loud, and when the breath caught in my throat, Marcus signed the next sentence as if he could pull the words down to my hands. Then I told them what I had decided. The original acre would not be folded into the general business. We would take Michael's option and buy it back for $1, then deed that single site into a trust we would call the Parker Teaching Garden. Jason would run it under a charter with 2 promises written so plain a tired mind could remember them. First hire goes to someone who needs a second chance. First harvest goes to a pantry that knows the names of its families. The trust would hold the land, not Jason and not me. If he stayed true 5 years, clean books, clean hands, staff respected, neighbors fed, he would earn the right to steward the place without us watching the hour hand. If he broke faith, the trust would choose another steward from the people who had already been doing the work. Vivian nodded before I finished. The foreman gave that single grunt that means more than 5 speeches. Jason swallowed, eyes bright and not running away. He said he would sign wherever we needed him to sign and show up wherever we needed him to show up. He asked if he could hang Michael's letter, a copy in the office, so he could see it on the bad mornings. I said yes. At the county clerk's office a week later, we took a number like everybody else and waited under fluorescent lights that hum like old bees. The clerk, a woman with a silver braid and a patient smile, read the option twice and shook her head in pleasant disbelief. She handed me a pen. I paid $1 for an acre that had cost us our sleep in our 20s, and then we handed the deed to the trustee we'd chosen, a retired teacher who knows how to keep minutes and secrets. Jason signed the stewardship agreement with hands that didn't shake. Marcus stood on a chair and taught the room to clap without sound. Even the clerk tried it, palms lifted and flickering like leaves. Alyssa showed up that Friday at exchange time with a cooler in the back seat. Inside were cut fruit and 2 small meals labeled with dates. She said the co-parenting class had a cooking module and that Silas had helped. She did not apologize and did not need to. Jason thanked her, buckled his son in, and asked if they could plant fall carrots together on Sunday. She said yes. That is how some truces start, not with speeches, with carrots. The opening day of the Parker Teaching Garden felt like church without pews. Neighbors brought shovels. A man from the seniors group donated a row of rain barrels. The veteran rolled in a cart with hand tools he had oiled like rifles. We staked rows and bent to it, a line of backs, old and young, working in time. Vivian read the charter aloud and tacked it to the cedar gate. Work with your hands. Tell the truth. First hire, first harvest. The wind lifted the page and laid it flat again as if to say, Amen. Jason took the first shift at the shed and signed in a young man from the shelter who had been sent by a counselor with a note. He shook the boy's hand over the counter and set him to mixing compost with sand, the way Michael taught us for seeds that need a gentle beginning. That afternoon, Marcus led the first class. 10 kids with knees already dirty, showing them how to tuck a seed into soil like you were handing it a blanket. He taught them the sign for patience and the sign for second chances, and the two together made a shape I wanted to carry in my pocket. When the sun went down, we strung the lights and ate pie at folding tables. The foreman made a toast with his coffee cup, 3 words only: good, honest work. People clapped the quiet way, as if the night itself were listening. Later, when the crew had gone and the heaters ticked as they cooled, I walked the beds with Vivian and set Michael's letter back in its envelope. I told her the ache that used to sit behind my ribs had shifted. It hadn't disappeared, but it had moved its weight into something I could carry without listing. She said grief becomes a trellis if you let it. You don't carve it away, you train your life to climb it. We locked the gate and stood under the old wooden sign. Jason lifted Silas so he could touch the letters with both hands. The boy traced the grooves where Michael's knife once bit the pine. Home, Silas said, careful with the word like it might break. Jason kissed the top of his head and looked at me over the boards. There was a time when he would have looked through me and past me. Not now. He met my eyes and held them, steady as a post set in new concrete. This is where our circle closes. Not at a finish line, but at a gate that opens each morning to the same simple work. Show up, tell the truth, put your hands to something that grows. If this story has kept you company on your own hard stretch, if it has reminded you that it is never too late to plant what matters and tend who you love, then stay with us. Subscribe so you do not miss the next season. I will keep telling it plain the way older folks do, because at our age, the only thing worth spending is the truth. And tomorrow, before the light comes full, we will make the round again. Palms on metal, ears to the quiet, hearts set toward the row we promised to keep.